On this episode of AvTalk, we mark 2 years since the crash of Ethiopian Flight 302 and the beginning of a years-long effort to fix the 737 MAX and return it to service. And airBaltic CEO Martin Gauss joins us to discuss how the airline has managed through the pandemic, including becoming an all A220 operator almost overnight. Hello and welcome to episode 107 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with...
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. Are you still thinking about flying down to Antarctica like I am?
Absolutely, I am. I would be lying if I said I hadn't planned on how to do it next summer season in Antarctica. So I guess next winter here in Chicago. Yeah, still thinking about it pretty much a week later.
Yeah, don't even need your passport. And that's good because I don't even know where mine is anymore.
And you can't really use it now anyway.
No, on that note, actually, I have eclipsed 1 full year without getting on an airplane, which is super, super depressing. 1 year and 2 days.
We're both over a year out now then. That's
just over a year. I
mark.
actually, though, just last night, I booked my first flight maybe not post-pandemic, but anticipating my chance at getting a vaccine in the near future, hopefully before my mid-June departure date. We'll see. And
if not, then I guess you take advantage of the generous and flexible arrangements that most airlines continue to offer.
Yes, the airline industry has become so accommodating out of nowhere.
that came out sounding like an ad, and I totally did not mean it to.
But it's pretty much, at least in the U.S., I think every airline at this point is offering free change and cancellation.
As long as you promise to keep giving us your money eventually, you can do whatever you want with the ticket.
Well, that's the thing. They already have my money, and I'm not getting it back.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The airline is saying, as long as you let us keep your money, you can fly whenever you want.
Exactly. So I'm looking forward to that. Very cautiously optimistic. Probably should have done it for July instead of June, but we'll see. Gives me something to look forward to.
Exactly. I have not yet booked any travel, but I'm itching to do so. And so I've been performing speculative research to see what prices look like and things like that. And they're still encouraging, I guess, from a consumer perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe not from a revenue management perspective.
Well, it depends. A lot of people have asked me, are flights stupid cheap these days? And it depends where you're flying and what region, because in a lot of places in the world, capacity is so ridiculously reduced that whatever is left is quite expensive. So I was looking at New York to Seattle, and on some days it was close to $500 round trip in economy, which is well above what it used to be. But then on other days, I could fly $300 one way in business class and JetBlue Mint. So it's really all over the place right now. So there's no guarantee that anything is cheap.
Yeah, we were finding that out as we were talking about your purchase and some of the other places that are looking good in the interim. But we'll see how things shake out, and hopefully everyone gets vaccinated as quickly as possible. And we're, in a couple months' time talking about doing a podcast episode, not from our homes, but really from anywhere else.
Literally anywhere.
So we had some folks write in to the podcast email and message us on Twitter. And I think I got one ACARS message from someone that asked us to reintroduce ourselves for folks who may not have started listening to the podcast from episode 1 or very early on when we talked a little bit about, who Jason and I are and what we do. And I thought that was a perfectly reasonable request. And so why not? I am the Flight Radar 24 Director of Communications, which means I have the best job in the entire company. I get to play with Flight Radar 24 all day and tell people about it, and then sit down with Jason once every week or 2 weeks and talk about airplanes and what has happened in the world of aviation.
You're just living the dream.
I really, really am. And so this is one of the many things that I do. A lot of it is also, working on our social media stuff, blog that we have that everyone should go check out if they haven't already. We put a lot of great stuff up there that we don't necessarily talk about in the podcast all the time. And I also get to tell people about all the great stuff that we're doing with the website and the apps. And in normal times, I get to go enjoy the company of other like-minded people. So, for instance, conferences and things like that. So that's a little bit about me, and I will let Jason ramble on about who he is.
So I am not an employee of Flight Radar 24. I do not get paid to look at Flight Radar 24 and tweet about it and blog about it, as some lucky people such as Ian does. I'm very jealous of that, by the way. Once upon a time, I got my start in the industry actually writing about the passenger experience on board. So things you interact with, the Wi-Fi, the entertainment systems, the seats, all that good stuff you touch and interact with on board the aircraft. And I did that for a few industry publications and sites. And for the past, I guess, 7 years now, I've worked for a company that actually aggregates data on all that information and sells it to places where you actually book flights. So Expedia, Google Flights, Skyscanner, Sabre, if you're a travel agent. Our company shows you all of the information about what is available on that specific flight on that day. So what entertainment you'll have, what seat you'll have, what Wi-Fi you'll have. It's all very interesting stuff, at least to me. And all of this stuff it started off as a hobby for me, and it's slowly morphed into my entire life. And now I work for this industry-owned company that and now I make a living out of basically turning that information into usable data that passengers can use to book flights and know what they're getting into ahead of time.
I so very rarely these days know what I'm getting myself into ahead of time. So I always appreciate that.
I don't think you're supposed to anymore.
That's just part of life now.
It just happens.
Yeah, I like it. So that's a little bit about who we are as far as kind of our professional backgrounds. I think I speak for Jason when I say we're also both very much into aviation from a young age. I'm not sure when Jason started staring up at the sky at everything that went over. But for me, that was about 5 years old when we moved into the childhood house that I grew up in. That was at the end of the runway at O'Hare. So I went to bed every night with the landing lights coming into my bedroom and aircraft going over. So that's kind of where I got my start as far as really liking things that fly.
Yeah, a bit similar for me, but I guess I was a late bloomer in that regard, in that I also grew up just outside of JFK in New York, not far from the airport, and never really paid any attention to it until probably my late college years or even postgraduate years, when I was no longer living in that area. And I suddenly realized that something was missing over my head. There were no airplanes where I was living. And that part of my environment that I grew up with was gone. And now I was suddenly very interested in what it was over my head all those years. So I never really paid too much attention to it back when I was growing up, but I knew that Sunday mornings when the house was very loud and it shook violently out of nowhere, that was the Concorde going over my head. And when I was in the parking lot at a shopping center outside the airport and all the car alarms went off, that was the Concorde. That was pretty much the extent of my knowledge of aviation at the point.
We were the anniversary of the first flight of the Concorde, or of Concorde for sticklers here, was very recently, I think last week, and chatting about, not being able to fly in that. Jason, you didn't fly in the Concorde, did you?
No. In fact, my neighborhood was actually one of the extremely vocal local organizations that protested the start of Concorde and actually delayed it by, at least a year from being introduced into commercial service. Yeah, that was my neighborhood.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
In any case, that's one of my big aviation, wish I had been able to's.
Yeah, I had flown its replacement, the A318 Baby Bus, but it pains me to know I will never fly on the actual BA1.
Well,
that's the episode.
There you go. We're recording on March 10th, which is the 2-year marks 2 years since the crash of Ethiopian Flight 302, the second 737 MAX crash in just a few months' time, and kind of the beginning of a years-long saga that has culminated recently with the reintroduction of the aircraft into commercial service just a few months ago. So nearly 2 years since the second crash, the aircraft spent grounded as Boeing and regulators worked to understand what went wrong with the aircraft, what was wrong with the system design and how it could be corrected, correcting all of that, and then putting the aircraft back into service. So now we're 2 years since that crash. The aircraft is back into service in North America, in South America, Europe, and I suppose one operator in Asia. SCAT recently restarted service a few weeks ago with their singular MAX 8. But I guess the big 737, there's two bits of 737 MAX news, and both of which came out, thankfully, before we recorded this week's episode. So
which is a rare event, literally minutes before we hit the record button. Yeah, it's usually the other way around.
Exactly. I want to thank Southwest and for, well, it's not even, I want to thank, I think, Reuters for breaking the news prior to us recording. But I also want to thank Jon Ostrower for his interview with Tim Clark prior to us recording, because that
which one do we talk about first?
Well, let's set it up by talking about what's in service so far, and then we'll talk about what Southwest is, what Reuters is reporting Southwest is about to do. We don't have official confirmation, but we're seeing it from multiple sources, so we'll stick with it for now. And if we have to come back in 2 weeks and say we were wrong, I won't feel terrible about it. And then we'll talk about what Sir Tim Clark has to say about Boeing and what they've been up to. But back in service this week, tomorrow, the 11th. So by the time the podcast comes out, it will be a day into it. We've got Southwest bringing the aircraft back. They're returning their 737 MAX fleet to service with some dedicated routes for the first month. So the routes that they'll be operating on will just be 737 MAX routes. There won't be any crossover. You'll know if you're on a MAX, and there's no chance that, if you're scheduled to be on a 737 NG, there's no chance you'll end up on a MAX.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to do it, at least for the start, where that's a possibility. I can't imagine that lasts too long at an airline the size of Southwest, though.
Right. They've said they're going to do it for a month. So I recognize that they're trying to assuage people's fears or make people feel more comfortable or something like that. But good for them, I guess. But they'll do that for a month and operate them on some dedicated routes. And then after that, things will kind of open up after, I guess, the end of April or about the middle of April.
Do we know what those routes are by chance?
We do. I don't have the full list in front of me because they were released and then they changed slightly, but I can find the link and drop it in the show notes.
Perfect.
But they're kind of all over the place. It's not they're not keeping it to just kind of the X Texas or anything like that. They'll be spread out, but we'll put a link in the show notes. So on the heels of that, today, what Reuters is reporting is that Southwest has finally reached an agreement with Boeing for up to 300 737 MAX 7s, or the Dash 7, 130 firm orders, with an option for 170 more. Knowing Southwest, I would assume that they'll probably take all 300 eventually.
Yeah. Southwest has a metric ton of 737-700s of the NG family to replace in the upcoming years. And Ian, we were talking about this before we hit the record button, that it really feels like the MAX 7 was an aircraft produced solely for and to meet the needs of Southwest, doesn't it?
Yeah, nobody wants the plane besides Southwest. Their WestJet had orders and pretty much got rid of them. So that basically leaves Southwest, and I think there's a handful of others. But just looking at the Southwest fleet, the 737-700 is by far more than double the 737-800. Current in the fleet, 737-700s, 492, 737-800s, 207. And the MAX is almost up to 70.
Yeah, so not a ton. And I'm looking at Wikipedia now, not the greatest source for this kind of information, but there are only 2 known airlines on the order books for the Dash 7, and that would be, of course, Southwest, who previously had 30 on order, bumped that number up by another 300, and WestJet with 22. And it's not even clear that WestJet will actually follow through with those orders. They probably will not at this point.
They just reduced theirs by 15, I believe, this morning. It was either yesterday or this morning where they've reduced their MAX orders by 15. Not a well-loved aircraft outside of Southwest's flight profile.
No, but there's always a chance it'll see orders come along. I mean, we've said the same kind of thing about the Airbus A330 Neo 800 variant, that nobody wanted that. And we've seen that aircraft get picked up by a number of airlines. I think most recently Garuda dropped some information that they ordered a couple, not many, a couple 800s, which is a little surprising.
Right. I mean, this is one of those things. It will happen, but I'm glad you bring that up, because it puts it kind of into perspective as far as the build process goes. I mean, Airbus is, as far as Airbus is concerned, the 800 and the 900 are frankly interchangeable as far as building them goes. I mean, you can order one or the other; it doesn't matter. So there's no cost for an airline to order just one, as far as Airbus is concerned. I mean, similarly with the MAX 7, you can order any type of mix, so it really doesn't matter if they don't order them in bulk, which I think, really speaks to what Southwest is doing with their 737-700 replacement and ordering the, up to 300. We'll call it 300, MAX 7s.
Yeah. So the smaller variants of these aircraft may not be the most loved or most wanted, but there is a need and a place for them somewhere at some airline.
Yeah, exactly. Some outlets are pointing to this as a very, very big win for Boeing, in the sense that there was competition between the A220 and the 737 MAX. Okay. Well, Jason made it easy. I was going to say I'm hesitant to buy into that. Jason just doesn't buy into it at all, I guess.
No, I mean, of course, Southwest is going to go out there to the marketplace and see what's what, and see what other competitors are willing to offer. The A220 and its variants being the closest match to the 737-700, but realistically, I don't think there was ever a chance that Southwest, the actual all Boeing aircraft, not Alaska, Southwest, there was no chance that Southwest was going to defect to the A220. It just did not make any sense, given that they are, in fact, an all 737 airline, and they already operate the MAX. I'm sure this was great negotiation tactics to lower the price, and Southwest probably got a hell of a deal, given everything that's going on. I'm not even going to point at anything specifically, just everything that is going on right now.
Wildly.
I am just gesturing wildly out the window at everything that's going on. It did not make sense for Southwest to do anything else other than go back to order more MAXs. This was an inevitability in my mind, but it was sure fun to watch the turbulence along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it.
Thank you.
It was fun to watch the turbulence along the way. Yeah, I mean, perceived competition is always a very interesting thing, where you have to, and every time Ryanair orders aircraft.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say O'Leary always brings up Comac and the C919 as competition for Boeing. None of that's real. Let's be serious. None of that exists.
But the whole idea that they could take Airbus aircraft or something like that. We with what the O'Leary saying, we might buy A320s. Well, they tried that without, and they got rid of them, and it didn't work, and moving on. And then they went and ordered 200 more 737 Max. So that perceived competition, it's tough to take it seriously. I mean, especially when you're selecting. So I guess I would love to be a fly on the wall at Boeing going, how serious do we take this? We know this is a negotiating tactic. We don't think they're serious about that, but we have to pretend that they're serious. Yeah, I would just be interested in being a fly on the wall for that.
Yeah, this is why I'm not in sales.
There you go. There you go. So that sets up the kind of the where we are with the 737 Max and Boeing's push for the aircraft to return to service. That sets up, I think, one of the most important interviews I've seen with someone in aerospace and aviation within the past maybe year or two even. And that's Jon Ostrower's interview with Sir Tim Clark, who is the head of Emirates. And he had
things to say.
Tim Clark has stayed on. He was set to retire. I believe he's 70 years old. And he was set to retire. And then, a pandemic hit.
Bloody pandemic.
Yes, in his words. And so he has stayed on at Emirates. But I think, and Jason, we were talking about this a little bit before we were recording, about how when certain people in the industry speak, they are listened to, but what they say might not be taken at face value. Tim Clark is not one of those people. He is someone who has been around, has done a great deal, not just for Emirates, but for aviation in general, has driven Boeing's wide body development, has driven Airbus's wide body development, and has kind of laid the groundwork for a number of airlines to follow. And so in his conversation with Jon Ostrower, I was struck by just how frank he was. And so if you haven't subscribed to the Air Current yet, we, for probably the 15th time, suggest that you do. John's not paying us to say this, but he doesn't have to, because he gets these interviews, and then it's, I think, really important to give a little glimpse into what some of the things that Tim Clark had to say. So I'm going to start with there's two quotes in this entire interview that I think are really, really encapsulating of where we are. And this is one of the quotes about the Boeing board of directors from Tim Clark. Culpability for the culture, strategy, direction, priority of that company rests with the Boeing board and nobody else. And that's where the buck should stop. And that's where they need to get themselves sorted out. He continues, so going forward, the relationships that airlines have with the likes of Boeing will be conditioned by what they see they are doing to sort out their internal problems. Oof. Yeah, that's one. And then here's the second one that I think is kind of really the kicker. Why was this allowed to happen? Why didn't you listen? Was this, we were too arrogant, too maverick? Did we know it all? Who can tell us? We are Boeing. No, all that has to change. A little bit of humility. Understand what you look like from the outside.
Yeah.
He didn't say anything that I can disagree with.
No. He is summed up in those two pull quotes what I think a lot of people have been saying about Boeing for the past 2 years at this point. But it cannot come from anyone more significant or more, I guess, well-known or in a position of power than Sir Tim Clark. The man, as you said, Ian, he has really helped shape Boeing commercial aircraft, at least the wide bodies, to this point. Remember, Emirates was supposed to be the launch customer of the 777X, which is indefinitely delayed at this point. They are, I believe, the world's largest operator of the 777-300ER.
Mm-hmm.
So Emirates has a lot of sway at Boeing, and he is clearly not happy with the fundamental behavior, the culture of safety at that company. And it is clear from those quotes that he does not believe that the corporate culture at Boeing has actually changed.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that Boeing thus far has said, no, there's been no grand sweeping gesture from Boeing. There's been no act of contrition.
No, it's basically been, hey, we've changed. Take our word for it. And when we asked, can we talk to you about it? They go, no.
Just take our word for it. And I'm not a Boeing customer. I don't buy airplanes.
Petro Air does not operate Boeing aircraft.
Well, we do, but they were produced in 1967 or earlier. Remember, our fleet is one of the oldest in the world for a reason.
It's a good tagline.
Oldest in the world for a reason. I just, as a communications professional and as someone who charts kind of a public face and a public course, I have yet to understand, and I'm sure there's a lot of deep history here and some very good reasons for why Boeing has done what they've done over the past couple of years, but I still don't understand it.
No. And I will remind everyone that although Boeing says they have changed, when they forced Muhlenberg out as CEO, they replaced him with someone who was already sitting on the board of directors for the entire duration of the 737 MAX program. So it's not like they brought in fresh blood, somebody new to oversee Boeing and right the ship. They installed a CEO who was helping to steer the ship to the port that they were already in. So it's really hard for me personally to believe that they changed when they just put someone in power who was already guiding the company to the position they're in now.
Yeah, and that's a big chunk of it. And the other part of it is what beyond fixing the airplane, which I believe they've done. I mean, almost 2 years of work, because it's not just the FAA this time. It's not reciprocal certification. It's the FAA. It's Transport Canada. It's EASA. It's the Brazilian regulators. It's China still not certifying the aircraft, saying they're still not satisfied. Certainly some of that is part of a separate geopolitical discussion that we've had in the past and will certainly have again. But various national regulators or supranational regulators, in the case of Europe, saying this is what we've got and we are satisfied. So that part I'm not concerned about as an engineering-led effort. What concerns me is kind of the additional information that's come out, not just the 737 MAX, but look at the 787 quality issues. And, as far as Tim Clark speaking, they have 787s on order. And as a customer, I would be concerned if all of the aircraft being produced for me could possibly have a defect.
Yeah, I think Boeing is only starting to start the process of delivering 787s next month even. So I still don't think they're actually delivering 787s yet.
Yeah. And so we're in the midst, I think, of a long period of Boeing figuring itself out. And none of this is to say that I don't think they will. And none of this is to say I don't want them to. I want them to succeed.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I want them to build the next great airplane. I want them to build whatever comes next, whatever the NMA eventually becomes. I want to see that, and I want to fly on it. And I want them to be around. I want them to get their house in order. I would very much like to be able to say, Boeing, yes.
Yeah. And at this point, though, that's just not the case.
Right. That's just not the case. And for Tim Clark to come out and say this, I think is just, I don't know if it's wind in sails or taking wind out of sails, but I think it's huge for him to come out and say this.
Yeah, especially since I'm sure the man has lots of actual day-to-day dealings with Boeing. I don't know if he just has an axe to grind from the last few years or if he's burning all the bridges behind him on his way out of the industry, but this needed to be said. He has said what others have not been able to say, especially people, even very outspoken people in the industry. You're probably guessing who I'm thinking of, but there's another CEO of a Middle Eastern airline, a neighboring country, that is generally quite outspoken, but has not really said much about this situation.
Yeah, and so for Tim Clark to come out and say something like this, I think it carries a lot of weight in the industry. I hope it carries a lot of weight within Boeing, and we'll see what comes of this, and whether or not anything comes of this with Boeing or not. Jon posted a follow-up to his interview that Boeing has now officially declined to comment.
Yeah, probably best.
So let's move on to an update on United Flight 328 and an update there. The NTSB continues its investigation, and we'll put a link in the show notes to some updates, some additional imagery that the NTSB has laid out, as well as an updated narrative after interviewing the pilots. So we learned a little bit more about what the pilots were doing on the flight deck and some interesting information there. But what I wanted to talk about today was the the airworthiness directive that the FAA released earlier this week. So this supersedes the emergency airworthiness directive and adds a bit more information. And last time on the podcast, we were speculating about the hours and cost of what it would take to inspect all of the blades, the fan blades on the Pratt & Whitney engines, the affected 4000 series engines. And the FAA now helpfully provides estimated costs in its updated airworthiness directive. So the action that the FAA is requiring, it says that it estimates that the airworthiness directive affects 104 engines installed on airplanes on the U.S. registry, which is interesting because we've talked about airplanes that are stored versus airplanes that are active. So I'm not exactly sure how they're breaking this down as far as our aircraft that are stored at this point, maybe just not coming back into service because of the cost. That'll be something that we'll wait and see. But they estimate that it takes 22 work hours to inspect the fan blades. They provide a labor estimate cost of $85 per hour. And so the cost per product is $1,870 for a total cost in the U.S. operators of $194,480, which is lower, significantly lower than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I think this, I'm speculating, I don't know, maybe you can correct me, that this is only the physical act of inspecting the fan blades. This is not the time of the aircraft being grounded, of course. I don't think it accounts for maintenance staff getting all of those fan blades out of the engine on the aircraft. So obviously 2 engines per aircraft, packaging them, sending them out, and then doing it all in reverse, putting all the fan blades back on the engines. That cost probably mounts up quite a bit higher than what Pratt & Whitney is saying there.
This is just the cost to do the inspection. Once Pratt & Whitney has the blades, here's how much it costs. The other bit of info, so if there's damage to the blade, they need to be replaced. This is why roughly half the value of an aircraft rests within the engines after it's been, put through its useful life and has reached, the time when it's either time to scrap it or part it out. Each first stage blade on the Pratt & Whitney 4000 series, the FAA estimates the cost to be $125,000. Aircraft engines are not cheap. One blade, $125,000.
Oof.
So, yeah. I cannot afford to purchase a blade.
And that's just the
That's the blade.
first
That
stage?
is not. Yes, that's just the fan blade. That
Just
is
the first stage, the fan
that
blade. There
is
are other sets of blades inside the engine.
That is just one of the blades. That's not the cost to install it. That's not the cost to inspect. That is just the purchase price. You walk into the fan blade store at the Pratt & Whitney warehouse and say, I want that one. That'll be $125,000. Now, the question becomes, can you put that on the corporate credit card and do you get miles?
Oh, I guess if you're a United employee, you're going to want to go in there and use a United Mileage Plus credit card, right?
Again, not an ad, just a joke. Yeah, I don't know how that works, but I mean, I'm not shocked by that because I know these things are, millions and millions of dollars. But just when you part it out, when you specify the cost of each individual part and go, one of those fan blades costs, roughly half a house.
And there are how many in a single engine?
22.
And there are two engines.
That's
a lot of money.
That's just the first stage fan blade.
Yeah, that makes bird strikes and bird ingestions.
It does put things in a whole new light, doesn't it?
Worse. Yeah. Every now and then we see reports of there was a bird strike. That could be millions of dollars.
Yeah. So we should do an episode of the podcast for the insurance industry.
That'd be fun.
Aviation insurance. I'm going to make a note of that, and we'll try and find somebody because I would love to know how that all works out. Are bird strikes covered?
Definitely take a read of the investigative update that the NTSB put out on March 5th. It has some insightful information, some bits and pieces of information like that the FDR indicated that the engine made an uncommanded shutdown, which is, that's interesting. Yeah, that the fire warning didn't actually turn off until well after the crew discharged both fire bottles on board, which I'm led to believe is because that's temperature driven rather than actual fire being active fire. But there's a lot of interesting information in that first initial report from the NTSB.
Yeah, we'll have a link to that in the show notes along with some of the photos that the NTSB has released as well. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back from break, our colleague Gabriel Lee sat down with Air Baltic CEO Martin Gauss to talk about how Air Baltic has made it through the pandemic, including becoming an all A220 airline basically overnight through a choice a direction they were going, but their hand was certainly forced. So when we come back, we'll enjoy their conversation. So stick with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
So, Mr. Gauss, welcome, and thank you for joining us for this interview. I wondered if we could start off with a little about how the past year has been at Air Baltic. Obviously, complicated times for everyone, especially if you're running an airline. So I wonder, what did you have to do to sort of change about how the airline operates? Is there anything you wish you'd done differently, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was an interesting year behind us. And exactly a year ago, we came to the week where we had to stop flying completely as one of the only airlines in Europe at that time, because to protect Latvia, the government decided international air traffic will be stopped. So we stopped completely for 62 days. And what we did at that time, was everything we knew about the pandemic. We focused only on staying, then revising our product for the future, and then we prepared to grow. That was the focus at the time. We did that very successful, took strategic decisions, and then we went into this year. And after the 62 days, we had a big relaunch, a new start, and there was a lot of hype for people to fly again. And we had a very big success until we came to the early summer, when for the virus, it slowed down again. And where we are now, 1 year later, we are at the lowest possible level. So we are ensuring basic connectivity, but we are flying very little. And we are now waiting basically for the real restart, which will come. And that is, I think, now clear to everybody when sufficient vaccine levels have been reached in Europe. So that's after 1 year. We are here. We made it. We are in a good and strong position. We did a lot of changes to our strategy, took a lot of decisions, became a COVID 5-star airline from a Skytrax rating, so very proud of that. And we are flying today in this COVID time a very reduced program, but we ensure connectivity.
Yeah. I wonder, has the pandemic changed the overall strategy at airBaltic at all, or the approach, aside from the obvious, aside from taking the necessary precautions, reducing schedules as necessary on a sort of larger scale? Has it changed the strategy?
It has changed the strategy in the way that we had a business plan, very clear communicated that we would be in the year 2023 retire the Boeing and the turboprop fleet and have only the Airbus A220 as the only aircraft then. That decision was taken immediately a year ago on the day of the stop, basically, to stop all other fleets and only fly the Airbus A220. And that strategy change has changed our business going forward because it happened 3 years earlier than it would have happened if the crisis wouldn't have come. So that's the change in strategy. Apart from that, we, as we could then focus only on the A220, we have only seen improvements because everything we wanted to reach 3 years later, we have already reached when we started again last year in May.
Right. And that was going to be one of my questions. Now that you are an A220 only airline, I wonder, I mean, obviously it's different right now because you have such a reduced schedule, but how is that working out? And do you ever sort of miss the smaller size of, say, the Dash 8 or something like that to be able to swap around different capacity of aircraft on different routes, that kind of thing?
It works out perfect. When I go back, when we had the restart, we were just having one aircraft type. It makes things so much easier. Everybody today is trained for that aircraft type. No, of course, there's flights when you fly only with a handful of passengers. There you could use a different type, but the complexity of swapping aircraft, not having the same speed, range, comfort, no, not at all. We are not missing at all any of the other types. We are very, very happy, and we're putting all efforts in to make sure that we, for the future, will only operate that one type. It has so many benefits brought to our customers and to our operations that we would, if we could, would take that step earlier, even knowing what we know now.
Right. And I assume that passengers find it a positive development, those who are flying, to find that it's always going to be an A220 these days.
Yes, and that was already, we were this operator where everybody in the world said that such a wonderful aircraft. When we launched the Airbus A220-300 as the launch operator, we got this global attention for such a wonderful aircraft, and passengers were then writing to us, when will it be on this route and when can I fly? We had people booking tickets because of the aircraft in the beginning, and now all the customers know whenever they book a ticket on airBaltic, it can only be the A220, which still today, 4 years after we introduced it, is a state-of-the-art aircraft because it has this wide-body feeling and a narrow-body cabin.
Right. So speaking of that, you yourself are type-rated. You're a pilot on the A220. I wonder what that is like, being the CEO and also able to fly the aircraft. That's the staple of the fleet.
It makes me, first of all, it makes me very proud. I'm a pilot now for 29 years. I was flying 737s, and I used the COVID year to finish my type rating on the Airbus A220. I'm flying now, and I have to say it makes me extremely proud to fly in our airline. It also gives me a lot of insight, which as a pilot I maybe would have, but actually flying the aircraft itself gives you on top of it a different insight. But the biggest benefit is that in the daily operation of the aircraft, I see what it is capable of doing. And if we look here at the highlights of the aircraft, it's avionics, the capability, what kind of approaches you can do, all the modern technology that aircraft have. As a pilot, it's very interesting to operate.
Does having that insight to knowing what the plane is capable of, does that give you, I don't know, new ideas for different types of service or different destinations to serve, or broader ambitions for the airline?
No, I would say that being the CEO, that's the key job. And I try to find with my team the strategic decisions. I don't want to be influenced being a pilot. We have very capable pilots in the management who can take that role. But of course, whatever you do in life, if you do something which is different to your daily routine, you get new insights. And if you have ever taken off a jet into the sky, especially in winter weather, you're going through the clouds, reaching the sun, and then you're cruising and crossing countries. It is very different, and you have different thoughts. And of course, that influences you. everybody. But it's not changing the strategy or influencing the daily job I do as a CEO.
Right. How about in terms of flying the plane? I mean, you mentioned some things about it. Is the A220, does it have any kind of idiosyncrasies, any unexpected characteristics, anything special about it that you could tell us about?
Yes, if you compare it to a 737 Classic, then definitely it has. You cannot really compare it, and that's what pilots will tell you, because the aircraft is the most modern cockpit technology you have. But also the way how you operate an Airbus A220 is very different to an Airbus or a Boeing. And therefore, the philosophy of operating the A220 is really state of the art. Pilots can tell stories about it. It's very much liked among pilots because it delivers a very high level of comfort, the aircraft, for the pilots. It has everything you would wish for if you're a pilot. So today it has even too much navigation equipment. You can't use all of the stuff it has because it's ready for the future. And in general, it is very comfortable. You can really focus on your job as a pilot to monitor what's going on, because that's the job of today's pilots, to monitor the operation, not so much the hand flying. But of course, it also has a very nice maneuvering capability if you fly by hand. But this aircraft is designed for the future. And as a pilot flying the Airbus A220, you're flying a future aircraft.
Great. So if we move back to sort of the broader airline strategy, I'm curious, if we do see, assuming we see gradual improvement from here, more vaccines, virus recedes, travel demand comes back, what's next for airBaltic? What should we expect to see, the kind of big moves? Tell us about what the roadmap ahead is for you.
It's very clear laid down. We have a business plan. It's called Destination 2025 Clean. Before it was without the word clean. And clean means we have cleaned out the 3 fleets. We focus on that 1 fleet. We have 50 Airbus A220 on order total, plus 30 options. Today we have 25 of them. We take on 7 this year, the next one coming in April. Then the following year we take on more, and then we have to take a decision to execute options. We will take these 50 aircraft for the Baltics, mainly based in Riga, but also at the moment 2 in Tallinn and in Vilnius, and that number increasing as we get more aircraft. And after the 50 aircraft, we have a very clear strategy to move out of the Baltics and also base aircraft in the Nordics, we call it. And on the product, we will keep a hybrid model, which was very successful before the crisis, and I think will be even more after the crisis, with the 145 seats and a full business class combined with an ultra low-cost cabin. I think we are perfectly set up. The aircraft itself comes with an excellent range because it can do very short sectors with 145 seats, more like a regional aircraft, but we can also fly it on very long sectors. For us, the longest sector is around 7 hours from Riga to Abu Dhabi. Now with the extension possible on that aircraft, we can even fly from Riga to Addis Ababa or Delhi direct. So the aircraft is enabling us to do whatever we want to do if it's about the destination, but we will keep what we have done very successful, a full business class where the middle seat or the seat next to you is free, but then also for the price sensitive customers, a very attractive economy class.
And would you consider flying to places like Addis Ababa in the future?
It is not something we're looking at now. We're looking at it in the form that you look at any potential destination, but we haven't made a positive business case for that. But after the crisis, the whole aviation sector is changing. We see this now with a lot of airlines changing focus on aircraft types. Everybody looking now for smaller equipment. We have the benefit of having probably the best small equipment, which can do both short haul and up to long haul. So, but we are looking always at what is the next potential destination. We will be serving 75 destinations this summer from Riga and 11 and 11 from Vilnius and Tallinn. But of course, we are not limited, and Addis Ababa would be now one where I say, okay, if somebody can make a positive business case on something like that, we could fly it. The word sounds interesting from a Latvian perspective because it's really far away. That's if you are in Africa, this is much closer, but here in Northern Europe, Addis Ababa sounds very far south.
Yeah, it's potentially exciting times ahead then. I wonder if I might just add one more question to finish up. Curious if many people are looking at this summer as a kind of potential where there is a kind of bounce back in demand, maybe even a surprising level. I wonder, are you optimistic about at some point this year, seeing a kind of surge in renewed interest and demand for travel and getting out there and flying around?
Yes, I definitely will see a surge. We can see that already because we had it when we started flying after 62 days being grounded, and we had a surge, an incredible surge. People were storming the aircraft, and I would say that we will have a luxury problem of having only 145 seats. And in the first weeks when that surge comes, we will have the issue: do we have enough aircraft? I think it will then level out a bit because everybody now wants to go somewhere and it's mainly leisure, and it will level out a bit. So we will see a surge, but then I think we'll reach a plateau and then we will see a gradual increase. And for the business travel, that will take a bit longer just because of company policies and businesses being very careful of restarting. But in 2022, we'll see that as well. When does it restart? It starts with the right vaccination levels in Europe and with the taking back the quarantine and self-isolation rules. That's the biggest thing stopping people to travel because you just cannot afford to be in a hotel for 10 days or 14 days to visit a place. I heard today, I'm not sure whether it's confirmed, that the Seychelles are opening, and you will see immediately if something opens, people will go there. So whatever opens, people will try to get there. Of course, if you can return and not self-isolate. So the self-isolation, which is needed because of still high infection levels, is stopping people to travel. But once there's a vaccine and no self-isolation, we will see a very strong surge.
Great. Okay. Well, Mr. Gauss, thank you so much. As always, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us and speaking with us today.
It was nice speaking to you too. Thank you.
Welcome back. And I really think that they've done a very interesting job in kind of shutting everything, kind of going into hibernation mode. As a small airline, they can do that. But what always strikes me is interesting is the balance that they have to walk between three national governments, basically being the national airline for three countries. Always a rough business when you've got that much kind of interaction.
Yeah, definitely an interesting airline going from all of the Q400s and then the old 737-500s now to an all A220 airline. That's a major, major shift.
And modernization overnight.
That happens.
So the big news in aircraft leasing is that AerCap and GECAS are, well, not merging. AerCap's buying GECAS because GE wants to get rid of its aviation leasing business because there's a lot of debt there, $30 billion worth. So now there's consolidation in the leasing business, and I think Jason, you've got some stats laying around.
Yeah, this is a major, major, major deal. This is, some people have compared it to like American, United, Delta, and WestJet all merging to become one, as it's that big a deal. But AerCap has 1,080 aircraft owned or managed with 289 on order. GECAS has 984 aircraft owned or managed with another 255 on order. So this is a fairly large chunk of the entire global fleet are owned and leased out by these two companies. Most airlines do not buy their new aircraft outright. They're owned by some sort of leasing company who ends up leasing it to these airlines. Or there might even be cases where there's sale and lease back, where an airline owns an aircraft and they sell it to one of these leasing companies and then they lease it back. But this is a very significant deal and a further divestiture of GE out of the space. GE has really pared down pretty much everything it does, really just leaving its engine operation, I guess. What's left? What does GE do?
Light bulbs?
That refrigerators, maybe?
Maybe.
I think my fridge is GE.
I mean, there's still plenty there. And if you work for GE, we apologize. But as far as aviation goes, they've really, really pared back.
Yeah, so that's a major, major deal. It's like David and Goliath getting together, and then the rest is all just like little ants all over the floor. I can't imagine that this won't see some sort of regulatory hurdle along the way, that this will just go through without any sort of objection, but we'll see.
We will see. Other kind of aviation business news that we will rush through in our sprint to talk about more planes and things like that. Amazon has invested or has exercised some warrants in ATSG, which is the cargo carrier that it leases aircraft from already. It leases aircraft from ATSG and Atlas Air for its Amazon Air subsidiary or business, which is thoroughly confusing because the planes are painted with Prime Air, but it's actually Amazon Air because Amazon Prime Air is now going to be their drone delivery service. And it's all very, very confusing to me, and I don't like it.
But which of those things will deliver a beer to me in under 2 hours by drone?
That's Amazon Prime Air.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that's the one I'm going to look into.
So basically, this is a further entrenchment in the air cargo business as Amazon looks to be kind of an inexorable march into starting up its own airline. So that seems to be where these things are headed. Who knows how long it takes them to get there? Or if they turn on a dime and say, no, we're not going to do that.
But several people have also pointed out that Atlas Air has a chunk of this invested as well. And Atlas Air does operate passenger flights or not commercial, but charter flights. So technically, Amazon is invested in passenger flights, albeit very indirectly. I don't really buy it.
They're there for the cargo. I mean,
exactly. The passenger aspect is incidental.
Yes. Let's see. What else do we have? In welcome news, I think all around, not just for the aviation community, but for lovers of wine, cheese, scotch. Let's see. What else do we have? Various fruits and nuts, et cetera, et cetera.
Where are we going with this?
I don't know. The U.S. and EU have agreed kind of to a truce for now on tariffs. So the aviation angle of this is that the Airbus Boeing tariff dispute is paused and will hopefully be amicably resolved at some point soon, because it was just getting ridiculous. Delta was taking deliveries of A330s and flying them to Amsterdam and then not flying them into the US. And so they were dealing with getting around the tariffs by not importing the aircraft within a specified time frame, and it was a little ridiculous.
Yes,
so hopefully
now that President Business is no longer in the White House, airlines can actually start taking delivery of aircraft that they have purchased without paying. How much was the tariff on it was significant, right?
It was something nearing 300% or something like that when we were talking about the C series or A220 now and dealing with other Airbus aircraft. It was and vice versa. I mean, some of the other things going the other way kind of retaliatory. It was just getting ridiculous. But
nobody wins in that situation.
That's been suspended. Yes, that's been suspended, and hopefully they can find a resolution there. Jason, tell me about Lufthansa's elderly aircraft.
Oh, boy. Well, if you are a fan of elderly multi-engine wide-body aircraft, your favorite airline is not going to be Lufthansa anymore. Let's put it that way.
That's a fantastic way of setting this up. I love it.
Thank you. The Lufthansa Group, I will say, not just Lufthansa, the Lufthansa Group, they will fly anything, or previously they would fly anything. But going forward, the primary aircraft in the Lufthansa Group fleet will be the 777-300ER, the A350-900, the A330-300, and the 787-9. And also can't forget the A350-900, but that means that the 777-200 is gone, the A340-600 is gone, the A330-200, the A340-300, the A340-600, the 767-300 on the freight side, the MD-11 freighter, also the A380, not an old aircraft, but 4 engines, and Lufthansa Group no longer likes 4-engined aircraft. They're all gone. They're never coming back. It's a phase out of 8 intercontinental aircraft types that will be permanently withdrawn from the Lufthansa Group.
Did we mention the 747-400s going away?
I don't think I did because those are not in the graphics.
Because they had already
they're already gone.
Already sent those away. But the Dash 8s will stick around.
Yes,
so
the Dash 8s
if you're
stick
looking
around.
to fly a 747 as a passenger and not as a box, you still have some options.
Yeah, oddly, Lufthansa did not put that the 747-8 or the 400 in their graphics of what is being removed or kept. But yes, the Dash 8 will remain, the 400s will not. And if you were a box, again, the MD-11 freighter is not long for this world at Lufthansa.
And as far as the group is concerned, if the aircraft is older than 25 years, regardless of whether that type of aircraft is sticking around, those will be going away very quickly. There will be there won't be a return to service for those, even if there is a periodic return to service for some of these aircraft before they are retired as a fleet type. So if you're old, you're out as far as the Lufthansa group is concerned.
You're going to Petchmo Air.
Exactly. So I'm picking up roughly 30 new aircraft. I think it's 29 aircraft in the Lufthansa group fleet. So we're talking Lufthansa Prime, I guess.
Sure.
So Lufthansa, Swiss, Austrian, and Brussels are the network carriers, and then you have Eurowings kind of over there, the other operator of wide-body aircraft.
Sad.
Indeed. What else do we have? We've got the last CRJ was delivered to Delta. Or not delivered to Delta. It was delivered to SkyWest.
Operating for Delta.
Or will be operating for Delta. So that was the 1,945th CRJ, and that is registered N840SK, November 840 Sierra Kilo. And
it is currently vacationing in South Bend for some reason.
As one does.
I'm not sure why. The aircraft was delivered from Montreal to Nashville, and then later that day went Nashville to South Bend. I have no idea why. Maybe SkyWest has some sort of base there to fit the aircraft out with an interior, which I think it should have the atmosphere interior that Bombardier was trying to push at the very end as a refreshed interior that this aircraft will have with Delta. I think Delta is the only airline that took it up, actually, or one of the only. But that is the end of the line for the CRJ family of aircraft. I'm sorry, the Mitsubishi regional jet.
Who started up operations in Australia?
Rex. Well, technically not. Rex already
who
was an
started
airline.
737 operations.
There you go. It's still Rex.
Spoiler alert.
Yes, so Rex had put into operation just this past week a few 737-700s that previously belonged to Virgin Australia, who went through bankruptcy and divested a whole bunch of, a majority of their fleet. And now that fleet is being used against them in the form of domestic flights being operated by Rex. And interestingly enough, the interior of that aircraft looks like it could still be operating for Virgin Australia today. There's not much of a change on board.
All divested aircraft can and will be used against you.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure that's in the Miranda rights somewhere.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that one alone. The last two things I want to talk about. One, I can't believe it's actually happening. Breeze.
You love this topic.
Breeze is breezing. They're going. The Department of Transportation has said, yes, you can operate flights.
Yes,
so
clearly the biggest hurdle along the way in becoming a full-on
something Baltia was never able to achieve.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was by choice, though. But this is a
still
big
need
deal.
to do a whole episode.
Yeah,
on that.
This means that Breeze can officially start passenger service. It is still not ready to do so. It doesn't even have an IATA code. You can't actually book a flight. Its website is only basically career postings at this point. But it is one step closer to becoming a reality.
I mean, yeah, you don't go and get, a certificate of public conveyance if you're not serious about things. So, welcome news for just the industry as a whole. I'll take it. I saved my favorite story of the week for last.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be your last one. Your favorite topic's not Breeze.
No, I saved my favorite story for last. So we don't normally talk about military aviation in here, but sometimes things are so ridiculous that we just have to branch out. And this week, Steve Trimble who used to be on our side of the aviation fence in the commercial business, but has since gone on to be an ace reporter on the defense side.
He was undercover the whole time.
He was undercover. He was sitting through a presentation that DARPA was giving, and they were talking about how they were having...
Who's DARPA?
The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's an arm of the U.S. government that is tasked with inventing really cool and often very scary things. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole as far as things that have been invented by the U.S. military, DARPA is the place to start. They're the arm of the defense industry that comes up with good ideas. And so their good idea this week was the folks who fly the VC-22s or the V-22s, the tilt rotor aircraft, were having problems with brownouts when they were landing. The dust was so thick that they couldn't see, and that was causing issues with being able to land safely. So what DARPA invented or came up with was what they're calling engineered living materials.
Elaborate.
To reduce the dust in landing zones for these aircraft. The engineered living materials are, among other things, self-repairing. I know. You're wondering what we're talking about at this point. You go, that sounds like some sort of fascinating new invention.
It must be nanoparticles or some sort of nanotechnology.
It really turns out that DARPA came up with planting some grass.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, they invented grass.
Meanwhile, at the White House, the new Marine One keeps burning that grass. And they can't land it there because it keeps burning the grass that they, for some reason, have in place of a helipad.
Maybe it's time to just put a helipad in.
Weird. I am looking forward to DARPA's new super intelligent nano-powered grass.
Engineered living materials.
Your tax dollars at work, everyone.
Oh. And on that note, this has been episode 108 of AvTalk. Thank you so much for listening. A programming note for those who are not yet subscribed. Research shows that when we say subscribe, people think it costs money, and it doesn't cost any money to listen to Jason and I. It costs you nothing besides time that by the end of the episode, you're probably wishing you had back. But Apple is doing away with the subscribe button, as Google and Spotify have already done, and you can follow this podcast.
Oh.
In any case, subscribe, follow, religiously download each fortnight, whatever you do. By all means, please sign up for the automatic downloading of the podcast onto your device, so it's easier to listen to. And tell your friends. Leave us a rating and or review wherever you listen to this podcast, and we very much appreciate it. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz, and I am off to buy some engineered living material helipad landing zone stuff.
Good luck.